this Sunday, we're going to pick up. We've finished, just gotten through some of the Beatitudes. As you've heard before in previous classes, before this episode, Jesus had been all around Galilee preaching, and then the setting for the Sermon on the Mount comes in Matthew 5. And the Sermon on the Mount takes up 3 chapters of Matthew. So it's one of the longest discourses. It's the first of 5 discourses. And later on, we'll hear that what comparison is that to Moses, the 5 books of Moses. So as we've learned, Matthew is kind of comparing Jesus to Moses. And so we have 5 discourses and 5 books that Moses is supposedly attributed to. So basically, the Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is teaching that God's children are those who act like Christ or act like God. And so very high standards are being expected of the disciples and of us. And it's the sermon is basically also referred to, Barclay, I think, calls it the ethics of the kingdom. And they have a high level of emphasis on purity of the heart. So we're going to be now moving from the Beatitudes to another section of the Sermon on the Mount, and it starts out with Matthew 5:13, which states, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trodden underfoot by men." And what does that leave you with? What do you think of when you think of you are the salt of the earth? What do you think his disciples were thinking?
Salt was very valuable. It was very pure. I don't think we realize, I don't think about purity when I think about salt. But, according to Barclay, it was one of the purest substances they had.
Right. It was being offered. Salt was actually had 3 special qualities, as Sarah was saying. It was pure. It was white, one of the purest things they say that came from the sun and the sea, and that it was used for sacrifices, pagan sacrifices, as well as Jewish offerings and sacrifices at times. And that what Christ was trying to say here, or what he was telling to his disciples here with purity, is that Christians or disciples must be examples of purity and standards of our conduct and speech. And Barclay even quotes James, the first chapter of James, where he says, "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." So the purity is what we're being asked, being pure is what we're being asked to be as Christians. And that's sometimes very hard. Christianity isn't easy, or being a disciple of Christ isn't easy. He says if it's no longer any good for anything, except maybe if it loses its saltiness, it's no longer good for anything except to be thrown and trampled underfoot. And does anyone who read the section remember the example that Barclay gives about that?
I had never heard that before.
I had
not me either.
That there apparently that in those days, you had an outdoor oven, and you put a heavy layer of salt down, and then the tile in your oven, and that helped hold the heat in the oven. And that when over time that salt would dissipate, and you would have to actually tear the oven apart and put new salt down there. So that was one example that I had heard. And also that Christians were actually, it says if Christians were not fulfilling their role as Christians, they were kind of on their way to disaster. And that there was a time when if someone had done something wrong, they would actually lay down, they would lay down, or if they left the church and then come back, that they would lay down on the ground and ask people to trample over them because of, being thrown out and trampled underfoot.
I'm assuming that the way I read it, they invited people to trample them. I'm assuming that people didn't trample them, because that would be rather right bad considering the lack of medical facilities.
Well, I assumed they stepped over them because they would want somebody to do that for them when it was their turn to get trampled.
Right. Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, I just assumed that, though. I could be wrong.
Yeah, they invited people to trample on
Right.
them. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This verse has always confused me about losing its saltness. I'm like, how does salt lose its saltness?
Right.
That didn't make any sense to me. But I guess after it's been in the oven for a period of time, I don't know if that changes the chemical.
Well, just think about being in the world, okay? That disciples are to be in the world, but not of the world, right? That you're supposed to be looking for something else, and being in the world and living your daily life, you can get watered down. Your Christianity can get watered down a lot and lose its saltiness, lose its punch. Okay, so that's the way I kind of read it, because it's emphasizing here, if you lose your saltiness, if you don't, keep if you allow it's very easy when you're with a crowd, think about high school or whatever, to accept the things that the kids around you, your little clique, are saying, and you might say things that normally you wouldn't say, like taking the Lord's name in vain, or cussing, or drinking, or whatever you might do. And not that drinking is bad. I mean, Jesus drunk and had fun at a party and everything, but it's going beyond that. So I think it's kind of, don't let your Christianity be watered down, by the world. It's the kind of thing I get out of that.
Well, another level of meaning that sort of came to me is how essential salt is.
Mm-hmm.
And so how essential we as Christians and our life as Christians in this world and our work for God is essential.
And Barclay even says of both of, like, we're going to be talking about the salt of the earth and the light of the world here as the kind of a transition between the Beatitudes and the next section. And that both of those are like what Barclay claims is one of the greatest compliments that are paid to people. It's when you're called, you are the salt of the earth. And so it's like paying the disciples this compliment, or disciples of Christ or Christians that compliment of being the salt of the earth. Can you take care of Piper?
It's a salt.
And I think you mentioned also the preservative feature, of salt, that it kept things from going bad. And now he's knocking things off the countertop because he's letting come in front of the computer. And Barclay even quotes Plutarch, I think that's how you pronounce it, who said that salt is like a new soul inserted into a dead body. Salt preserves it and keeps it fresh. So a lot of the food had to be salted we didn't have refrigerators or anything like that to preserve it. And so it says it preserves from corruption. And so Barclay is saying that Christians must be the cleansing antiseptic in the world. By their presence, they defeat corruption and make it easier for others to be good. So our job is to be pure, to try to help other people to be good, and share that through have them see it through our lives. But he also mentioned that it adds flavor to things. And that's what I think when I think of salt, is that it's adding flavor. And sometimes I thought, Christianity might be something that kind of takes the flavor, maybe a little bit of the fun and the flavor out of life, when you can't do this, you shouldn't do that, or whatever. But that's what Barclay is saying here, is that we should be showing joy to the world, and so we should be joyful and bringing that flavor to life, and not constantly, you're not constantly knocking someone down, but bringing people up, so that's one thing that I have always thought with religion, that it was constantly saying what you can't do, but
that's what it's turned into.
Yes, but
at least certainly when we were kids.
And
Jews had a few rules.
Well, right, and we kind of get to that, where the Jews had with the scribes had all of these rules and regulations, and so the rules became their religion. Don't do this and don't do that. But that what we're trying to do is show that God's love, and not just the rules. That the rules were one of the things that Christ came and broke a lot of the rules that we'll find. We'll talk about that.
I want to talk about those rules. Not too long ago, just out of curiosity, I went on to Amazon to see if I could buy the Talmud. I was curious about the Talmud. It's about 20 volumes.
Oh my gosh.
The cost was over $900. I don't know the Talmud, never will.
The things I noticed is that the Babylonian Talmud is 64 volumes.
Yep.
It said,
Yeah.
as Barclay mentioned in the book.
But yeah, it was over $900.
Well, you shouldn't waste your money buying that anyway, because those are man-made rules. They're not God-made rules.
No, it was a case of history. A lot of what I like to read is, how did we get from there to here? And we came through that path, and so I was curious about it.
Yeah, if you went far enough, I usually read about 20, 25 pages ahead, because I never know how far we're going to get. And
Yeah.
right as I was finishing last night, you get to the part where it talks about, you just go back to the 10 Commandments and use common sense.
Yeah. But in terms of history, one of the reasons that the scribes were so intent on rules was that when they had been exiled to Babylon, they believed it was because they had broken the rules. And they were trying to make sure that they never got exiled again, that they never gave God a reason to send somebody to take them over again.
I can understand that. That makes
They
sense.
went overboard with it.
To
Yeah.
think that all these rules before were oral.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't written down.
So the next section is salt of the earth, and then we have the light of the world. And I have this printed out here. This is not from the Barclay book, but this is just from the another version of the Bible. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand and give it light to everyone in the house. And this is another thing that Barclay said was a really one of the greatest compliment, to a disciple, is to say, you are the light of the world. And why would we feel that is such a great compliment for us?
Well, what strikes me is that the salt of the earth, so you have the level of the earth, and then you have the light of the world, which comes from heaven. So you have the earth reaching up and the heaven reaching down to meet. It's that, that we span heaven and earth.
Yeah. And what did Jesus describe himself as?
The lamb.
The light of the world.
Yeah.
In John, if we remember John, in John, there are two passages here. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And also, I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. So he is actually saying that you are the light of the world. So you are like me. He demands nothing less of his disciples than he would of himself, and expects that and sees that, in them, that they are bringing that light, bringing that message of the gospel, to the world. And and Barclay says that the Jewish people would have been very familiar with this saying, because they had actually spoke of Jerusalem as the light to the Gentiles. And they often called rabbis, their teachers, a lamp of Israel, bringing the light. So that they knew that the Jewish people, and here with Jesus, knew that it's never themselves personally that is bringing or kindling the light, that it's God, that's people, when they see us do good, we're showing them, we're not trying to do it for ourselves, we're trying to show them, and they're supposed to worship or see the good of God through what we are doing. So Christians don't produce their own light. The light comes from the presence of God within your heart. And Barclay kind of goes into what Jesus must have meant when it says Christians must be the light of the world. And he says that and he talks about hiding a light under a basket, hiding the lamp under the basket. It says light is something which must be seen. So houses were dark back then. They had a little oil lamp. They would put that on a stand to spread the light in the house. And that when people went out, they would actually put the lamp under a bushel to try to, it was hard to light things back then, they said, it was hard to light a fire. And so they had to kind of keep the lamp going, but they would put it where it would be safer, so that they wouldn't have to put it out and have to light it again. But basically what he's saying is that Christianity is meant to be seen through us, or God is meant to be seen through us. It's supposed to be visible. It's not just at church, that we are the light of the world. We're not the light of just the church, that we're supposed to be our goodness and our connection to God is supposed to be seen through the things that we do and who we are in ordinary activities of every day, what we do at work, what we do when we go to the grocery store, all of that. Also, he mentions that light is a guide. And so he actually mentions that, when ships are out at sea, when you're walking down your street at night, that Christians must make the way clear for others. So we must be a guiding light into the world. And then he said, also, we need to be a warning light to the world. And it's our duty as Christians to see things that are happening and try to make things, alert people to things that are happening that are bad. So Barclay is basically saying that the light, that as disciples, we should be the light that can be seen, the light that guides, and a light that warns. And what, any thoughts about that?
I liked in the 3 when he says, there are many people in this world who do not have the moral strength and courage to take a stand by themselves. But if someone gives them a lead, if they're the light, other people will stand with them or follow them. And I really liked that thought and spent some time thinking about that.
Mhm.
Some people are leaders and some people are followers, but you need both.
That can work both ways. So that's called group psychology. And Hitler was pretty good at that.
Pardon me?
Hitler was pretty good at that.
Yes.
You know, it can work both ways. And
Yeah.
when I see, again, we go back to what does it mean to be Christian? And then we go back to, are you Baptist? Are you Methodist? Are you whatever? They're all flavors. And we talked about that some weeks ago and how that gets represented. So I see a lot of people flying a flag of Christianity, telling me things that I can't agree with, and anyway,
And we're always asked to look at things and just determine whether I remember what would Jesus do and what would love do? And is this something that is bringing people closer to God and closer to Jesus's message or not? We have to choose. We have to see and analyze ourselves, and hope that we're right when we choose our battles.
Mhm.
And this is kind of followed with in 5:16, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And so I think that's what helps me kind of make that decision, is what I'm doing going to make things better for people or help people see the good, and not just myself, but the good deeds that we do. Are they drawing attention to God, or are we trying to draw attention to ourselves?
Mhm. Mhm.
Hey, so I've got a question about that, because how do you know the difference between drawing attention to yourself and drawing attention to God?
Hmm.
And if I don't want to draw attention to myself, I keep my mouth shut about what I'm doing. So how does so nobody knows. And I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
But then this says people should see what you're doing. So
Yeah, right.
I don't know which way to go. I tend toward the keeping my mouth quiet.
I remember the many people that have given to the church for one thing or another and given anonymously.
Mhm.
And I always want to know who they are, but then I said, no, I don't need to know. I don't need to know that. But
Well, one of the things that came to my mind about showing your faith or whatever is when we had our back porch renovated, put on a different room. The men that came to do the roof, they were a Latino of some kind. I think it was Guatemala, where one of the men was from. And they would meet in the driveway. They were going to be here to start working at 8 o'clock or whatever. And they would be here at 7:30. And they would get together and pray. And then they would go to work. And they put on this wonderful music that I enjoyed anyway. But I just thought it was so neat that they just, they didn't make a big deal out of it. They just came and got together and prayed, and then they went to work.
Mhm.
I had one.
And at a restaurant, when you see people, praying before a meal,
Yeah.
I
I had a class many years ago at Virginia Union I taught intermediate accounting, which was the killer accounting class. And one year I had a group that would ask me to pray for them before each test. And I would. You know, we'd come in for the test, and it was one girl in particular, and the rest of them seemed to be very appreciative. But one girl in particular, before I handed, Miss Reese, before you hand it out, will you pray? Will you have a prayer for us? And I thought that was cool.
She only asked for prayers for your tests.
Well, it never occurred to me to ask other teachers if she did it in their classrooms. But this particular course was the most challenging.
Mhm.
Do you think that most people, though, can, at a pretty good level, a pretty conscious level, tell when somebody is doing something for genuine good, or if they're doing it for their own self-motivation, their own self-aggrandizement, or whatever, you know, their own self-embellishment?
Or their own profit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But that internal motivation, I think, does make a difference.
And I think that it's sometimes the feeling that you get, like when I hear that someone is looking for something or wants something, it's like Bud knows that I'll be obsessive about trying to figure out how to get that, you know, for them. And so I remember a coat that my mother wanted once, and I was searching the entire United States and England and Britain and everywhere for that particular thing. But it's like, oh, I need peppermint sticks. Oh, well, I've got to go find them. You know, I think I'm obsessive compulsive a little bit, you know, about that. So, but has to, duh.
You know, Brenda Kidd said something to me, and those of you in CWF with me, I guess Sarah's already heard this. I used to be that way too, Susan. I have a very obsessive compulsive, like I want to get something done, and I'm like focused until I get it done. And Brenda told me once in CWF, she said, sometimes you have to not do something or say no to an opportunity so somebody else can say yes or do it. And ever since she told me that 10 or 12 years ago, I worry a whole lot less. Like when church sends out the meal sign up, cooking is not my thing. I do enough to get by, but it's really not my thing. Teaching or outdoors work or other stuff is much more my thing. So I tend to say yes to those things, and I don't feel guilty anymore about saying no to other stuff. I've been asked to be an elder multiple times, and I've said no every time. I just don't think that's my thing. I'm not, I mean, I know nobody knows they're perfect, but I just don't think, I mean, that's like top of the church, and I just don't think that's me. I think teaching is about my apex.
I would see you as a perfect elder.
Well, thank you. That's very sweet. I don't know. When I think of people like Juanita and Sylvia, and I don't know, I just don't, I mean, and Joe Bancroft, you know, I mean, I idolize these people. I don't see anybody in church idolizing me or thinking that highly of me. And I'm okay with other people saying yes to those jobs, and I'll weed the flower beds. I'm fine with that. That's where I'm more comfortable anyway. So Susan, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, you have to realize, as far as elders go, Sarah can tell you, some of us got that position because nobody else would accept them.
Well,
we got harassed into them.
well, I was
All you
asked
had to do was say no, and I
but
would have shut up.
I've been pretty firm about my no.
Well, I'm the same way, and I said yes to elder after thinking about it for a long time. But I can remember when I first joined the church, I thought I should do a little bit, I should help everywhere. And I helped in the nursery once. Once. And I did exactly what Kitten said. And I thought, I am willing and able to do things that other people can't. I can teach. And I never went back to the nursery and never felt guilty about it.
Yeah, I've never done worship and wonder. Same thing. I'm not gonna either. I'm not a gift with little kids.
Well,
Reese and John wear me out a lot of days.
being the salt of the earth and the light of the world is hard. It's, sometimes, but that's what we're challenged to do.
Yeah, and I think
You know what I think we need to be careful about? I think there are people watching us, how we treat each other.
yes.
Like if we have a disagreement at church, if we have a disagreement at a CWF meeting, at a, I don't know, there are people watching us. We need to be real careful there too.
Mhm.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. And the other thing that just came to my mind is there's nothing here that says we have to be all things to all people.
Right. Or
Right.
perfect in anything.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Not kidding. Cindy, I remember Cindy more than once in a sermon saying, God does not call you to be perfect. God calls you to show up.
And to try. Yeah.
Show up and try.
Well,
It doesn't,
people
God
that
is not calling you to be successful. God's calling you to show up and try.
Yeah, just think of all the people that he's called and how many of those people were prepared. Was Moses prepared? No.
Was David prepared?
David prepared? No,
Nope.
none of them. It's always the little guy who, that either has some kind of disability or whatever that you're called. And so who knows? But right, Kitten, I think that there are times when we were very active in a lot of different committees and everything at church. And then finally we said, it's time to give someone else a chance, to do this
Yeah.
and let me move on to do something
Something else.
because over time you get burned out
Yeah.
on a particular thing and you don't feel as energetic,
You lose your saltiness when you
You
burn
lose
out.
our saltiness. That's it, Kathy.
Good point. Good point, Sarah.
Yes, very good. Okay. Let's move on. This next section of Matthew 17 through 48. Barclay says this is the longest discourse in the sermon, and it's what is traditionally called Matthew's Antithesis, which is, where Jesus is saying, they say that thou shalt not kill, but here's what I say, kind of a thing. And he is basically, let's read it. Let's start by reading 17 through 20. Does anyone have that in their book?
I've got it.
In the book of Fulfillment of the Law?
Yeah. Do not think that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy them, but to fulfill them. This is the truth I tell you. Until the heaven and earth shall pass away, the smallest letter or the smallest part of any letter shall not pass away from the law, until all things in it shall be performed. So then whoever will break one of the least of these commandments and will teach others to do so shall be called least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever will do them and teach others to do them, he will be called great in the kingdom of the heavens. For I tell you that you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven unless your righteousness goes beyond that of the scribes and the Pharisees.
Right. Raising the bar.
But he was talking about the God-made rules, like the 10 Commandments, not the man-made rules.
Yeah, Barclay had said that with the Jewish people, the law was there were 4 different things that they thought of when they thought of law. One was the 10 Commandments. One was the first 5 books of the Bible, that the 5 roles, that was most important parts of the Bible to the Jewish people. That was Moses. And then the law of the prophets, which meant the whole scripture of the Old Testament. He highlighted that the commonest expression of the law, and what the law was in Jesus's time was the oral law, the scribal law. And that was what we see as all of these rules and regulations, the 21 volumes, the 64 volumes of that. And that was the law that Jesus was not talking about that when he was saying not one iota would ever, or one jot would ever be forgotten, and that it's eternal. He often didn't observe and broke the scribal law. He didn't observe hand washings. He healed people on the Sabbath. He was condemned, as a lawbreaker. And so Barclay kind of goes into this oral scribal laws where the scribes were responsible for really expanding the basic principles, which are the 10 Commandments, to come up with all these rules and regulations. And it was really enlightening, Sarah, when you were talking about, reading about how that came about, that they didn't want to be exiled again, and they thought that they had broken some law. But Barclay kind of goes into an example saying the Sabbath day is to be kept holy, and so no work is to be done. Well, the scribes say, well, what is work? They're lawyers, they have their 20 questions. What is work? It's to carry a burden. Okay, then they have to define what a burden is. Then burden is equal to, and here's some examples. The burden is equal to the weight to a dried fig, enough wine for a mixing goblet, milk enough for one swallow, honey enough to put on a wound, and goes on and on and on like that. And so endless hours would be spent arguing what to be done, what couldn't be done on the Sabbath. Can a parent lift a child on the Sabbath? Is that work? Is that considered work? And he goes on page 147. He has this long list of all of these rules. And so to a strict Orthodox Jew of Jesus' time, serving God was a matter of keeping these thousands of legalistic rules, and Jesus, broke that. He was saying, no, that the big principle, what Jesus meant by the law was in all things, people must seek God's will, and that when they know it, they must dedicate their whole life to obeying it. And he ties that in with the 10 Commandments. And he starts out with the next section that we go to is talking about that first one, thou shalt not kill. But with Barclay, he was basically saying that the essence of the law is reverence and respect for God and the name of God, respect for parents, respect for life, for property, for, he says, personality, and then respect for truth and for another person's good name, and respect for oneself, so wrong desires will not overpower us. And if you take a look down, you can kind of tie those things to one of the 10 Commandments. And so Jesus came to show us what in actual life as a human, what reverence for God and respect for one another are like. And when he's saying that not one thing will pass away, he is really tying it to those 10 Commandments, like you mentioned earlier, Kitten, and not to all of these all of these thousands of rules that the Jewish people were having to follow to be right. So it was kind of like whereas the Jewish people were saying that their respect and their religion was based on following the rules of the law, that Jesus was basically saying that we're following the essence of what God wants us to do. We're following the gratitude of the love of God and setting up good relationships and having respect for other people. And that was our role, is to establish good relationships with other people.
But you know, that's really hard to do, because even within Christianity, I mean, even within those of us gathered here today, we differ greatly on what this means.
I beg to differ with that.
I mean, we're all Christians and we all are trying to be kind to other people and love other people. And I mean, there are people in my family I don't even speak to. They block me on the phone and Facebook. You know, this is really, really hard. They, you know, when they put in this sentence, the reverence and respect did not consist in obeying a multitude of petty rules and regulations. It consisted not in sacrifice, but in mercy, and not in legalism, but in love. And that makes it sound, oh, it's so simple. Just show mercy and love everybody.
No, but it's not simple.
Oh my gosh.
Now, wait, it's not to my mind, it is simple. It's a real basic principle. Is it easy? Not all the time. In my mind, that's how I I'm differing.
The biggest thing I need to learn is not to poke the sleeping dog. I need to not say things that are
inflammatory.
well, but you know, they're not inflammatory in that.
Watch it, Michael.
Well, here's the thing. Capital punishment and abortion are both killing a living thing. But there are lots of people that believe one's okay, but not the other. They're both murder. You can't believe in one and not the other. You know, and it's like, wait a minute. Republicans say it's okay to kill criminals and Democrats say it's okay to kill unborn babies. I'm not okay with either one of those. So you can't really have a conversation with people about a lot of stuff because you poke people and I don't know, it ends up really ugly. So you just have to learn as you get older, there are just some things you can't talk about. They have their opinion, you have yours, and you leave it at that, I guess.
Well, what did Jesus say when he was sending his disciples out? You go to a village and you bring the message. And if they take the message, that's wonderful. If they don't, you kind of, you know, knock this dust off your feet and you move on to other places. And you know, Bud and I have both experienced, we have some really good friends that there's certain things we just cannot talk about.
Yeah. Well, Doug White helped me a lot about 8 years ago. He was the elder that day and I was a deacon, and we were sitting in the office at church on Sunday morning. And I said this exact same thing. And he said, Kitten, I used to struggle with that a lot until I realized I only have to answer for me. He said, I don't have to answer for anybody else. So I just focus on me. And he said he just doesn't argue with people about those things because it doesn't change him answering for himself. He said, I only have to answer for me. He said, I try to do what's best for me and let other people do what's best for them. And I've thought about that a lot since he said that to me about 8 years ago. I still argue with people though, because I still got to poke them in the eye, but
Well, and I think that Bud has had some experiences with talking with, there's some people that he knows that he can't talk with about certain hot topics, but there are other people who aren't so hot-headed that he can talk with them about those topics. And sometimes it helps him better understand what their thoughts and their thinking process is, and might help adjust his, at least to be willing to listen and understand. why they feel the way that they feel.
My,
But that's,
my problem in life is I'm a middle of the road guy.
Yeah.
And it started way back when I was young, and you go to the gasoline station and everybody there had their peanuts and their pop, and they knew the by God right answers to everything. And I was always kind of in the middle of the road. Well, this guy sounds kind of right, and this one sounds right.
Yeah,
trying
I
to
can see
be-
both
I
sides.
guess my role was trying to make it be a peacemaker, and I don't know that I'm very good at that.
no, but
Yeah.
I admire your ability to talk with people and talk through an issue with somebody that has a very different view. I've learned a lot from you and watching you do that.
Well, I have to say that over the years, by talking to many people like Bud that can stay in the middle and not get irate and angry with either side, I've totally changed my opinion on quite a few major issues. Abortion, well, I don't know about capital punishment, but homosexuality, I've totally changed my view on that, because you love a lot of people, but you don't like what they're doing. So as I've gotten older and thought about stuff more and talked to more educated people, I think I've changed my views on a lot of stuff. So like Bud, I love to engage people in conversation. But that's really hard to do sometimes.
I think the reason that it's hard to do is that people who are not involved with religion, I think, equate religion with judgment.
Yeah.
They feel that they have if God exists, they have no relationship with him, and therefore he must be angry with them, and therefore they don't want to approach the topic at all, because they see themselves in a situation where they are, separated from God. So if you try to talk to them anything about religion, they immediately put up the wall, because they believe that you are judging them as acting wrong in this life.
Mhm.
And I find it's from that point to try to explain that God is love, because that, first of all, they may not believe God exists to begin with. And if they have thought about it, they think, well, if I'm acting the way I'm acting, how can I be loved if, from what I've heard of the Bible, I do things that go against it?
Mhm.
But Christians do that too. I mean, I make mistakes every day that are against what I'm sitting here studying.
Right, but they don't understand the concept of forgiveness because they've never been taught it. They don't understand that there is a way to draw near to God. They don't know if they believe if God exists. And if he does exist, my actions are not my own. And that's a terrifying concept.
Mhm.
So there are so many things you have to get beyond before you can even start talking. And I think for me, I was so hungry to find spirituality that what I needed was someone to show me the path. But there are many people that either have no interest in it, or they're terrified of it, or they have a very negative, they only know little snippets. And what the world tells them, you don't want religion. Oh no, you don't want to go there. So it's hard.
Yeah,
Well, a lot
because
of bad things. I'm sorry, Kathy. A lot of bad things have been done in the name of religion.
Mhm. And that's what a lot of these non-believers have seen. They've seen the churches that have had huge fights within the church. They've seen these religious leaders who turned out to be criminals, time and time again. And
Well, let's look at
There's
those.
religion and there's the politics of religion. And
Mhm.
currently watching the series The Crown, which is about the Queen and the whole royal family and so forth. But just watching that, and Susan's a big Game of Thrones person, which I have come to the conclusion that life is a Game of Thrones. And I mean that seriously, somewhat jokingly, but seriously, there's so much interconnection. And a lot of the ideas we've talked about too today, when we meet and we say something, we all come with our own baggage. We all come with our own concept map of what that topic is about. And it's those moments when we can talk with somebody that changes one element of that concept map, which changes your whole understanding of everything. And so I get fascinated with that sort of stuff.
It's
life is a game of
it's
things.
9:50, so we will have to stop now so that everyone can get to church. But it reminds me, Kitten, of what you said last week, is that sometimes you're the kind of person who, when they see an issue, that you want to talk about it and nip it in the bud, you know, and get it right out there. And so I think that as we move into the next section, we'll start next week with chapter 521. And it's going to be some of the most important teachings of Jesus in the Testament, where we're talking about this antithesis in the Ten Commandments, and what he says, that we have heard, it was said, you shall not murder, but I tell you. And so we'll be getting into that. It talks about anger and how anger can be good and anger can be bad.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's it's 9:52 and we will close now, but thank you all, and
Thank you,
see
Susan.
you in
Thank
church.
you, Susan.
All right, thank you, Susan. Thank
The
you.
fastest hour of the week.
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. See you in a little bit.
Bye.